This is the Storyworks Roundtable, where we have conversations about craft, because becoming a successful author begins with writing a great story. Hello, and welcome to this week's Storyworks Roundtable. Today, Catherine and I are thrilled to be joined by Tim Auld, a writer-director whose veteran action film, Minotaur, won 5 screenplay competitions and has now been optioned. Tim's short films have been selected for various festivals, most notably Palm Springs International, and in 2022, he directed a pilot for a 6-part television series set in London. Tim is determined to make meaningful action films that his wife and daughter would watch over and over again. So, Tim, thank you so much for joining us at the roundtable today.
Yes.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So we are going to talk about didacticism today, which I'm pretty sure is that dinosaur that flies, right? The didactisaur,
right. Yep.
is it?
It is. They haven't made a film about it.
But you're going to, with lots of action, right?
Yeah.
Meaningful
Yes.
action.
Yep.
Yes. Yeah. So, okay. We were joking around before we started recording and decided to actually just start with a good old-fashioned dictionary definition to get everybody on the same page. So, didacticism, something that is designed or intended to teach. It is intended to convey instruction and information in addition to serving another purpose, such as pleasure or entertainment. It can also mean making moral observations intended to teach moral behavior. So, Tim, you brought this topic to the round table today because, let me turn it over to you.
Yeah, it's something that I think we've all noticed has crept into film and television, particularly in the last probably 10 years or so. There's certainly been a shift where the value of the story is dictated by the value of the message. And I think it's sort of started to overcome, the message has started to overcome the value of the story itself. So more effort is being put into the message than the story. And this is where didacticism, the didactosaurus swoops in. And I think it's all well and good to have something to say, and I think you should have something to say. However, I think we're losing our way a little bit in film and television. That's just what I'm going to speak to, is that people are very smart. Audiences are very smart. Doesn't matter what education level they have. They've had a lifetime of watching cinema and television, and they've got that lifetime of education behind them whenever they watch anything. And they do know what genre they're watching within minutes of anything. They know more or less what to expect from the plot based on what you've given them in the first 10 minutes of your film. So they don't need the message beaten over the head, and they also are not there to be lectured. That's the main thing, I think. So where I think it's important as screenwriters to learn this is that if you do have something to say, learn the rules of didacticism and not to fall into the habit of lecturing your audience, which can be really easy when you're writing something about something really important, even something that's universally viewed as negative. Like, my example would be if you were writing a film about racism, the only conclusion that you're going to make is that racism has a negative effect on society. You're never going to say that it's a good thing. But what you can't be doing is deciding that the theme of your film, let's say it's racism, is a learned behavior and can therefore be unlearned. Maybe that's the point you're trying to make with your film. You have to put effort into the very opposite of that. And you have to make your story start demonstrating the opposite of that all the way through, so that an audience is with you. Maybe a more simpler example would be something like if your theme was like love conquers all. Well, you don't have love conquering all the way through the film. You have love being overturned by other things, love not conquering all until love finally does conquer all at the very end. But you definitely have to put major effort into what is referred to as the counter theme for your film. So the counter argument, again, whatever argument you're making with your film is an argument about reality. It's an argument about the human condition. That's what they do. And so I just think it's definitely something that we need to just pull back on and realize that if you have something to say, you need to construct your narrative in a way that makes your audience feel what you're trying to say, not sit back and listen to your lecture.
Right. Right. Yeah. I think when writers get didactic, they are losing sight of the art form. You know, we aren't trying to write Sunday school parables. We're trying to create literature or a film, which wherever it falls on the genre spectrum, you know, it's still meant to be an art form. And I don't know if you agree, but I think the artistry suffers. The more you crank up the didacticism, the more the artistry suffers because of that browbeating of the audience.
Audiences like to come to their own conclusions. They, or at least feel like they've come to their own conclusions, but that's where the artistry comes in, is if you're good at craft, you will make them feel like they came to that conclusion. You don't need to overstate your theme. You know, whereas I think it ends up being a bit lazy. You know, we don't need characters to literally say the theme of your film, especially if it's something like about racism. You just need to, what you should be doing is demonstrating that, like the example I always think about is if racism is a learned behavior and can be unlearned, then what character journey would you have that demonstrates that? And it might be tempting to have a character who is experiencing racism all the way through, because the world's unfair and it's racist. And we see demonstration after demonstration of racism from, scene after scene after scene. But an audience will just get really, they'll just switch off. They're not desensitized to the thing that you're talking about, but they get desensitized because there's a contract with an audience that you have to have, and it's a respectful contract that they've come ready to hear to feel your message. They haven't come to a lecture,
right?
So what you should be doing is constructing a character who, for example, isn't racist but gradually becomes racist through really uncomfortable things that happen to him that an audience watches and feels uncomfortable watching, seeing this person get corrupted by bad ideas. And then somewhere in your third act, you have them faced with the ultimate dilemma where they've already become really corrupted and they can just keep going down into this abyss of extremism. And they even have a really good excuse to, but they don't. They actually turn back from it and they prove that, I'm going to unlearn this. This is wrong. This is morally wrong, whatever it is. But you've at least led the audience to a point where they're convinced that the opposite of your theme is true.
Right. So where do you think this trend comes from? I mean, we could call it moral signaling, right? There's a lot of that going around these days. But when it comes to our art forms, is it bottom up where writers are organically having these ideas and saying, I want to put this message into the world and I'm going to do it this way? Or is it like somebody writes a story in whatever form, and then when it gets to the publication or production phase, somebody on the corporate side of things is saying, this is what the audience needs, and wedging it into the story? Do you have any inkling of kind of where it's coming from?
Great question. I suspect both are right. I suspect that there are projects that have good intentions and reflect the craft in the right way, but they're too subtle. And someone at the end of that production line or at the end of that pipeline that you're referring to comes in and says, no, we really need to make this clearer that, and they have this particular political agenda that they want to insert into it. And maybe that writer has said, it is there, but they said, no, it's not clear enough. I think there are also other cases where I think a lot of writers, probably writers who live and work in Hollywood, I'm not sure how much time outside of Hollywood they spend, how much time outside of their immediate peer groups they spend with people who don't think the same as them or have come from different places in the world and have totally different politics and stuff like that. So I think that they sometimes forget that a writer is not an educator. A writer is actually someone. It's a vendor of catharsis. That's what we do. We provide catharsis for people, and that's the primary thing. So I think that that's been a little bit lost. I imagine social media has probably played a huge part in this as well. It's definitely corresponded with, because we all end up in our own echo chambers on social media, and that it must infiltrate people's writing.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think with social media and that echo chamber, people get so used to sound bites and trying to distill complex ideas down into something catchy, something tweetable, something that you can understand in 2 seconds or less, right? And then when you look at long form narrative and you're creating that piece of art, if people are in that mindset of soundbite speak and short attention spans, they might just be thinking, how do I most blatantly, quickly communicate this message to somebody, instead of working with subtlety and empathy and, the journey the characters take and such. Is 2024 the year you take your writing to the next level? Would you like to join a select group of fellow writers to expand your craft knowledge while working on your novel? Do you want to see your page count growing week by week and have ongoing access to an expert writing coach? New sessions of group coaching are starting soon after the new year. Schedule your free discovery call with me today. I'd love to meet you and answer any questions you have about group coaching. Go to wordessential.com/fiction coaching to schedule your call today. P.S. Not a joiner? I have individual coaching spots opening up in 2024 as well. Schedule that free discovery call with me at wordessential.com/fiction coaching.
Absolutely. Yeah, we do like simple narratives these days. Simple narratives to explain really complex things about life, which is what film tries to do. Films they're visual poems about life. They're about the human experience. And I'm talking about, the kinds of films that we all would put in our top 5, basically. I'm talking about films that really transcend and make you change your life. So, I'm not talking about films that are on the surface just trying to entertain, although they also do still adhere to this a little bit, and they do try to contain some kind of truth. But yeah, I think you're absolutely onto it about the simple narratives that we now seem to be attracted to, and that's definitely infiltrated this art form, which has never been about simple answers, simple narratives to complex truths about life.
Right.
Okay.
You think about the films you love from the 1970s.
Yeah.
And how many of them would get made today exactly as they are? And I think you'd probably find none of them would.
Right.
Because they represented, life as messy and complicated and full of ambivalence, and it's which is what it is.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Catherine.
Yes.
Are you ready to say
I've
something?
been mulling. Yes.
I've been
brewing in my.
I know.
Have you been watching it? Just
I've been seeing the wheels turn. I'm like,
Yes.
okay, any minute
It's coming.
now.
It's coming. I really feel strongly about that didacticism happens when you oversimplify everything down into that one thing, right? So your plot is in service of this, your character arc is in service of this. And we just did A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens in December. And that story has a very didactic core where he's trying to teach about, like you said, Alida, in there, it's all about the deserving poor, right? But what is the storyline is Scrooge becoming a more generous person, and through that affecting the deserving poor. So the arc, the plot, the things that happen aren't directly correlated. And I think when you look at, I watch a lot of children's television right now, right? I have a 5, almost 6-year-old. When everything is about that exact thing, that's when you start feeling like you're being beat over the head. We're learning that everybody is equal, right? And so everything is about that. Every little toy sharing thing that happens, every interaction on the playground, every moral of the story moment at the end, everything is about that. So then it's not really a story. It's 3 examples or 4 examples of this thing that you are trying to explain. Whereas the story format is much more, like you said, messy. It's complicated. We want to see a million different things happening and then one thing shining through at the end, not the same thing happening over and over and over again. So I think it's an oversimplification of a really complex art is where we start getting didactic, if that makes sense.
Oh, totally.
Absolutely. You have found the best example there with children's television, and I couldn't
it's
agree
terrible.
with you more.
I find myself censoring a lot. Like, nope, you can no longer watch that show. And it's not necessarily that I disagree with the message that they are sending. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't.
Mechanism.
It's just that it's not story. And I don't want you feeling like it is. I don't want you consuming that.
Right.
No, those people are not storytellers. That's not storytelling. So it's like I think the human brain is really quite rebellious, and it doesn't like to hear direct input from the outside of its boundaries. It doesn't like to be told, you must think this, and it will reject it. And this is why I care about this, because I do think people are turning away from films and television. My greatest love. People are just saying, "Oh, I watched 5 minutes of it and I just turned it off because I felt like I was being lectured." And I'm like, "Yes, I get it.
Right,
and so that's why I care about this." Yeah. It's like the human brain knows that. So the language we use with cinema is the same language that we use or that we experience when dreaming. It's all metaphor. And it's the same language. It's the same as where all our mythology came from. It's all metaphor. That's the best way to convey anything to another brain. You have to do it through metaphor. If you do it through a direct, literal message, it's not going to work. It's going to be either rejected, or just it won't be as powerful, because the other brain that's receiving the information has to feel like it came to its own conclusion.
Right.
And so the example that I give is, imagine a scene where someone says, "Don't do heroin because it's really addictive and you might die." Now, that might all be true, but the other person hearing that's going to be like, "Yeah, thanks. I know." But if they told a story and they said, "My son was a real fighter, but heroin takes no prisoners." Well, then you feel an emotional response to that, and immediately you walk away, and you've come to your own conclusion. You haven't been told directly. I think the only time I can think of where this kind of literal messages that are exactly what they are works is when you're driving and you see a stop sign. In that context, you want very literal messages, directives, because your safety is, important, and you're focused on a task. So you don't need metaphor. You need something really quick to tell you what to do. But when it comes to storytelling, it has to be all done through metaphor. Right. There's no potency to the message if it's done literally.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and you could have told that story, you know, my son died of heroin. Okay. But you didn't. You told it, he's a fighter, right? And heroin takes no prisoners. That changes it as well. It's not just telling this is a fact that happened. And so it's like easy to say there was a moral there. Heroin will kill you. There's a story. My son died from heroin. And then there's changing it, making it an empathetic connection through that metaphor.
Mm-hmm. You know,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
mentioned,
Yeah.
you mentioned the movies of the 70s, and as we're talking, I'm remembering this iconic moment in Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and they talk about it in documentaries and interviews and such, where are you familiar with Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood? That might just be an American thing.
Haven't seen it. You found the one film.
Oh,
You
no.
know,
Well,
please tell me.
so
It's a
it was a
children's
series that was on PBS, Fred Rogers.
I see. Okay. Yep.
And this was probably, I assume, in the 1970s, but I'm not sure which year, how close it was to 69 versus later in the decade. But the police officer on his show was a Black man. So everybody is your neighbor, right? Won't you be
It was
my
a
neighbor?
neighborhood
Kind of a
Yeah.
thing. Right. And so
the neighborhood police officer comes by
Yeah.
his house. Yeah.
Right. And Mr. Rogers has a kiddie pool, and he's sitting out on a chair with his shoes and socks off and his pants rolled up and his feet are in the kiddie pool. And the policeman comes by and they start having a conversation about the weather. And Mr. Rogers invites him to sit down, take off his shoes and socks, and put his feet into this kiddie pool. So it might have been closer to 69 than 79, right? But this was a shocking moment for audiences because of racism, because you just didn't do that. Even if you weren't a racist, that just wasn't normal. And you think about communicating to the hearts of your audience, and especially an audience of children, and how different that moment is than some TV show today saying, racism is bad and you're my friend and everybody is good, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You found the perfect example there. That is so poetic. And nobody can hear that or see that and not be emotionally affected. And no words need to be spoken. You know, like I've had some experience with making documentaries, and one documentary experience I had, just the most negative I've had, was we went out and filmed some people who'd been affected by. I'm from Australia, so we had terrible forest fires years ago, and the year after the fires, we went around with a camera and we were interviewing people, and the people who were funding the documentary, they had an agenda, and they were only interested in filming interviews and using footage that supported that hypothesis that they already had, rather than actually the truth that we went and found. And I think that, you know, and it ended up being what I said to them: you're making propaganda here. And I think that we're edging into that territory a little bit when you abandon poetry and you prioritize directives and messages like that. And it feels like propaganda. And it really doesn't matter if your intentions are good or the message is good. It still goes into that territory, and that's why it gets rejected by audiences.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Yes. You know, and there is agitation, propaganda, agitprop theater was something I studied in college when I was getting my theater degree. And then you are very intentionally writing and producing something in order to agitate your audience's feelings so that they will consume your propagandist message. Right. And even there, though, like the theater I studied and my understanding of it, and of course, I didn't grow up to be a theater historian, but my understanding of it is that it was short. It was guerrilla theater. It was on the streets. It was in and out. And it was designed to sort of shock and awe, but to get people to think about the message and to have a reaction to it. So it wasn't meant to be this pablum that we see today, where we just feel like messages are being rammed down our throats. And, you just nailed it when you said it's propaganda. That's what it's become. And it's propaganda without the thoughtfulness, I find, when I encounter it.
Well, and I think that a lot of times we're being asked, like, what do you mean? What are you trying to say? What exactly are you trying to convey to people? And I think to some extent, yes, all stories have that built in, but I think part of that is just your personal being. And if you're developing a story and not developing a moral, you're going to have better luck avoiding this problem, right? So that you can answer that question of, well, what are you trying to say? Well, what did you get out of it? That's a better conversation to be having with somebody rather than feeling like the only thing you can have a conversation about is exactly what you tried to tell them.
Absolutely. We don't write fables. Fables are a useful thing, but they should never be compared to the stories and the stories that we tell. I mean, novels and screenplays. They're not fables. Fables have an unambiguous truth behind them that's revealed by their own structure. Even a fable doesn't say, and the moral of the story is, unless maybe people added that later. But if you recite the story of the boy who cried wolf, you don't need to be told what the message of that story is. From the structure of it. The structure tells you what the theme is, and it's actually the same thing in screenwriting. The structure of your story does dictate the theme, and yeah, so you should never go into it thinking, okay, I've got this message that I want to say, and I'm going to make sure that it's front and center, because nobody responds to that. They respond to the emotional journey. And so yeah, I think if you've got something to say, that's well and fine. That's fine, but you need to work on the opposite of what you're trying to say, what your message is. But you also have to give it credibility. So I always think about, like, in my fictitious racism film that I think about as my example, you'd want to have all of the racist people. Don't do the easy thing, which is to just depict them as gun-toting racists. Like, what you should do is make them all really human and show that they're people, and they're the people next door. They could be you, and that's what makes an audience really buy into that and feel uncomfortable, because that's what audiences really want, is to see themselves up on screen in whatever form that is.
Right.
And then you can do, and you can you've got to put credence into the opposite theme. And so that then when you do undercut it, your theme has had to work hard. Your theme's had to work hard to win the argument against the counter theme. And the counter theme has to get to a point where it's like, it's going to win this argument. Your audience needs to really think, wow, love really won't conquer all, after all. And then that's when you pull out, no, it will. And then it feels earned.
Right.
So yeah, it's
right. Yeah. The poetics of storytelling, the making your message work to win the day, all of these things we've been talking about, they're the foundation of discussion, right? When we, as a reader or an audience member, engage with true storytelling, we feel, we think, and it opens us up for conversation, even if it's only internal, but hopefully it's with other people as well. And you said something, Catherine, that reminded me of that echo chamber idea, where when the message is just so clear cut and cut such a hard line through the story, it's like there's nothing to discuss because there's nothing to disagree with. There's nothing to question. There's nothing to engage with or dive into or explore. And so how can you grow? You can just say like, yep, I agree racism is bad, or I agree love is good. Okay. And walk away. And that doesn't connect us with the human experience or our own humanity or invite us to evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
I'm waiting for you, Catherine. But
oh, I'm like,
I agree.
Did we just hit a dead end? Was that a
Didacticism is bad. Fossilize that dinosaur.
I love it.
Yeah, I think your cooling off their feet in the pool example is the perfect poetic example of what you should be doing. It says everything. It's an event. It's something visual. It's poetic. That's what we respond to. It's what our brains always respond to with metaphor. It's the only way. It's like whenever you try to describe a concept to somebody, you use a metaphor to explain it, and then they go, "Oh, I get it now." So that's the language that our minds speak. We don't really speak this kind of literal propaganda kind of talk.
Right.
And it just doesn't work. It doesn't work on people. It doesn't convince anyone. You know, you look at the audience attendance numbers and the engagement numbers with cinema today, it's dismal. And I think this has a lot to do with it.
So why do these films keep getting made when we know this doesn't work? It's not the way to produce art. And when numbers are proving this, why do they keep making it?
I think that it's a great question. I wish that more of them, the more expensive ones, wouldn't pay off, but they pay off within the first week before people start talking about it enough to realize that, no, it's just another lecture. And so they've already made their money, and on paper, it's a success. So I think that's partly why they keep doing it. The whole. Sorry, what were you going to say?
I say we all crave something awesome. Like we all want to go sit in that movie theater and be like, yes, here it is. Like there's that next thing that we can all, rally around or really love, or I'm going to go see it 3 times, or I want to go see it in the theaters, or I will spend a lot of money to go see it in theaters, because it's worth it. And so I think we're all searching for that next thing, and instead we're getting sequels and reruns and redos, and all of those are based off of really incredible stories that maybe did hit a really smart theme for people, or really or touched a point that really resonated across a lot of people, right? But then instead of following that, they're just taking the bits and pieces and recreating something that's not as awesome. So it's like we all want it so bad that we're willing to invest our time and our money and our energy to try and find it, but it's just not there.
Absolutely. And I think that because they are packaging, I'm speaking about this they as if they're this shadow organization, but in general, the people who are the biggest culprits of didacticism, they already have the biggest IPs anyway. So those IPs are why people go and watch these films or subscribe to the streamer service that provides those stories. And then they just they're like a whale. They'll just take it all in anyway. And some people will just ignore the lecturing and the moral posturing, and others will hear it and then switch off to it. But by then they've paid their money as well. So I think financially it still seems viable only because you own that IP already. But if you were one of those companies and you were only making original content that no one had ever heard of, but you still had just as much moral posturing, you would fail overnight.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I quit reading a book because of the moral posturing, and it was a book I was looking for to read, historical, female protagonist, but the opening, it was set on a indigo plantation. So of course there were slaves, and as a younger female protagonist, and they just devoted, I don't know if it was the author herself or her editor, publisher. I don't know who was behind this choice. So I'll say they devoted so much of the opening word count to making sure I understood that slavery is bad, even though this was then, and they had slaves because it was a plantation and that's how it was. But our protagonist doesn't believe that. She really likes her Black people, and well, she's a woman, but she's not a helpless little girl on a plantation. Her dad is raising her to be a strong woman. And I'm just like, for real? Can you not just tell me a story? Like, do you think I don't know that that's the thing because of the times we live in? And when this was written, it was such a browbeating. I was like, okay, I don't care about the rest of the book,
Absolutely. And it just touches on what I was talking about before with the contract that you have with your audience. They, you have to respect them. You have to respect that they'll get it. They'll get your story. You don't have to explain it to them. Certainly not with these sort of caveats at the beginning. Like who can get into a story emotionally when they've been lectured about it already? It's just
right. I know.
Way to kill the mood,
Yeah. Why not just apologize for setting it on a plantation in the first place?
Just write a different story.
Yeah.
Just write a different story.
Like if you're going to write historical fiction, be historically accurate and don't
romanticize it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but wonder what you look at how complex our world is today, and the amount of differing voices and opinions, and just the whole very idea of truth itself is under question. And how hard it is to actually find the truth because of the way that our world is set up with social media and the internet and everything like that. Now, fast forward 250 years, and how people will look back, and what is the summary sort of little one-line narrative that they would say about our world, and get it completely wrong, because it's actually a lot more complex than anybody could say one sentence about. So, yeah, and more interesting too.
Definitely.
Yeah, I think like in some ways with the didacticism thing, it's, I don't mind if you have all this political, whatever your politics are, if you have a political agenda. I just think that you're going to make a bad film if that's your primary agenda. And because you'll only be focusing on that. You won't be focusing on what's important and what an audience actually connects to, which is an emotional journey that a character goes through.
Right.
So you're already off to a bad start. So I'm not saying that they should just stop with politics in film and TV, because I think it's fine. It's a good thing in some cases. I'm just saying, if you're going to do it, you do it right. Like put effort into the opposite of what you're saying, so that you give credence to the argument that you finally conclude with your theme and your story. And that will convince the people you're trying to convince. But you're not doing that now. You're turning everyone away from your message. So you're just getting it wrong for everybody.
Right. Definitely. My newsletter, A Room Full of Books and Pencils, is growing every week with new reflections, writing tips, and transcripts of the podcast. It's also where I make announcements about things like upcoming writing workshops and coaching sessions. Check out A Room Full of Books and Pencils at booksandpencils.substack.com. If you enjoyed that conversation, make sure you join us in 2 weeks when Tim Auld returns to the Storyworks Roundtable to discuss The Hero. You can connect with Tim in the show notes at storyworkspodcast.com. Thank you for listening to the Storyworks Roundtable. Find all our shows, show notes, and videos at storyworkspodcast.com.